All right, we are here. What's up, everybody?
Good evening,
Um,
all.
this is
Hey,
Killing
hey.
for Company. My name is Kellen, and we got the whole gang back together. So,
The,
um,
the creepy old Cthulhu gang, right?
for sure. If anyone tuned in to around this time last year,
Yeah.
um,
August.
on my channel, we did a series dedicated, a two-part deep dive dedicated to Blut Aus Nord, and we went through the sort of entire discography, the catalog. And so when I saw that there was a brand new record coming out, um, just a year later, I, of course, enlisted these fine gentlemen to join me. And we're going to talk about the newest release and kind of our thoughts given our history with the band and going how it relates to the catalog. So, for those who don't know, I'm joined here by Geoff from Gas, Mask, and Hand Grenades. You may recognize him from that channel.
Hola.
And Peter from Metal Vault.
Nope.
We are trying so desperately for Peter to get a channel going, but we
Yeah.
have yet to succeed in our efforts.
He has these things called young children that kind of are somewhat interrupting that plan, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Lack of sleep, usually, most nights. Um, but just even watching back our stream from last year, I think it ended on Geoff, you telling me to hurry up and make a channel.
Mm-hmm. And
So
here we are a year later.
Exactly.
Still trying.
Yeah.
Peter needs a little more motivation. Apparently, we're gonna have to call on. I'm gonna have to pull out the Necrominicon, and or is that how you say it, Necrominicon? Yeah, and worship the old ones and bring them hither and make Peter bow and submit to Cthulhu or something.
Okay, well, like I said, the reason I wanted to get both Geoff and Peter back to do this was not just to talk about the record, but because we've had so much time to going over the catalog for this project. Um, I guess I'll start off just checking in. Here we are. I guess the last year, um, the first Disharmonium record was released in May of
Yes.
22. So here we get some 15 months later, a little bit over a year, very quick turnaround for the second Nahab within the, I guess, Disharmonium series it appears. So when you first saw this, this record was coming, I guess I want to get your initial impressions. Like, this is not the first time that Vindsval has done sort of series of albums. He kind of works like this often, where we'll
A
get
lot.
these explosions of creativity and a very concentrated theme. And then we'll get a few albums that sort of appear. But I just wanted to know, like, what's your initial impression when you heard at least of the album, before you actually heard a note? When you heard that the album was coming, you saw the title, what did you think? So I'm going to start here with Geoff and give you the stage.
Well, not surprised in the least. And, we talk about Vindsval, Mr. Blut Aus Nord, Blut Aus Nord, however you pronounce it, Blut. I'll probably keep saying Blut. Uh, he kind of has a habit of doing this. And the difference here might be that the first trilogy was essentially the Memoria Vetusta trilogy, and it was spread out over many years, and there was pretty good gaps in between the first, second, and third. But the 777 trilogy was pretty much boom, boom, boom. Now, I didn't look up exactly the number of years or months in between sects and desanctification and cosmosophy, but I'm pretty sure it was in about a 3 to 4 year, 5 year period at most. Whereas Memoria Vetusta, you had Fathers of the Icy Age, then you had a significant gap. You had Dialogue to the Stars, and then you had another significant gap, which was filled, I believe, with the 777 trilogy, and then you had Saturnian Poetry. So this is a little bit more in line with what he's done with regards to 777. And frankly, the thing that surprised me most is that we didn't have a hallucinogen trilogy, because that's kind of what I expected back in 2019, I believe, is when hallucinogen came out. Am I right? Okay.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
hallucinogen comes out. It's a pretty big album for him, from what I recall, as far as the kind of publicity it got and the overall general acceptance of it being pretty high. It ranked very high in like Rate Your Music and all that stuff. And so I kind of expected a hallucinogen thing. So when Undreamable comes out in May of 22, and Kellen, you'll remember initially I had approached you about, hey, let's do this Blut Aus Nord thing on my channel. And we talked about it in anticipation of that coming out, and my health really cratered, and I was like, look, you take it. And then we ended up doing it in August. But I was kind of shocked at the pretty much right turn it took, because it wasn't the epic black metal gladiator swords to the, I don't want to make it sound like a power metal album, because Hallucinogen is not a power metal album in the least, but it is a epic black metal tour de force, right? With gigantic harmonies and gigantic thematic melodic stuff going on. And what do we get in May of 22? We get this dank, creeping, crawling monstrosity that harkens back, and we'll get into that in a minute, to earlier tropes, but adds a bunch of new stuff. So, and here's where I'll wrap it up. I could have sworn back in May or in and around that time that I read that he intended this to be a trilogy, and that there was going to be a new album coming fairly quickly. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but when I got to thinking about it, I'm like, well, didn't he kind of announce that he was going to be doing a trilogy in the Cthulhu thing? But I could have been wrong. But I think we do need to also remember one thing too here. Between Disharmonium, Undreamable Abysses to Disharmonium, Nahab, there's a stopgap sort of thing going on there with Lovecraftian echoes, and that is, I think, pretty important, which I'll get into in a bit. So, yeah, was I surprised? No, not at all. Did I? Honestly, I kind of expected it a little sooner. I'll be blunt with you. I kind of thought it would come out maybe within a year or so, because I have a suspicion that Vindsval works in large groups of tracking. He puts a lot of ideas down, starts to mix and match and twist and turn and move, and because everything's digital for him in a digital world, and you can do that. It's not like going into a studio and tracking analog tracks where you couldn't do that kind of stuff. So yeah, I kind of expected this. That's the truth of the matter.
All right, Peter, I'll let you jump on this next.
Yeah, so I suppose I had mixed kind of feelings in that just come off, well, not that long come off the deep dive, and I wasn't sure if I was in the right space to listen to more Blut Aus Nord, considering what we've been through. So
yeah,
but at the same time, when I seen the title name, then I think we left the deep dive thinking, well, it's Hallucinogen Part 1, Disharmonium, Undreamable Abysses, maybe Part 2, because we had the good trip that had gone bad. But obviously seeing the title, and I thought, well, maybe this must be a separate thing, and Hallucinogen maybe isn't part of it, isn't connected to Disharmonium, Undreamable Abysses, because he does like to work with the preface of a trilogy. So Memoria Fitutsa and 777. So, yeah, like you say, like Geoff just said, it doesn't surprise me that he probably does creates so many songs, pieces of music in one sort of time period, and then he's going to release them slowly over the next year or so. And I was just checking, the 777 trilogy came out in the space of 18 months, the three albums.
Oh, it was 18 months between the three?
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
April 2011 to September 2012. So
there you go. He's actually spaced this one out a little bit more, actually.
Yeah, and then just for obviously tonight's discussion, I thought I'd actually delve a wee bit deeper into the Lovecraftian stories because it's not something I'm awfully familiar with, and some things start to make sense. Even some of the stuff I was kind of, for me personally, how I felt with the previous album is making a wee bit more sense now too, and where he's coming from in the story. But we'll obviously touch on that later. So yeah, so I'm obviously glad to hear a new album by him. But yeah, initially it was like, I need a break.
Yeah.
I guess I'll jump in here quick. My initial impression, or at least when I heard, like, I was not surprised. We've all kind of talked about how he tends to write in these sort of concentrated efforts.
Blocks.
What I thought was interesting though was, like, I remember listening to Undreamable Abysses and thinking that there was some sort of like connection to hallucinogen. And now with Nahab, I feel it's a little bit, it's kind of a one-off. There's the distance between the two records, between hallucinogen and Undreamable Abysses now seems a bit more, I guess there's a greater gap. Like,
Yeah.
it's a bit now. I don't hear as much sort of connection between them, and I was trying to think about the catalog. You know, there's sometimes, like, I don't know. We were talking about Odinist. Now, Odinist comes out, I think, after Mort.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's like parts of his catalog where it feels like they are transitional records or him trying to move from one sound into the next.
Yep.
And after listening to Nahab this past week, that's where I kind of feel it's at. Like, hallucinogen was kind of something in his system that he needed to get out, or didn't know how to get to this Lovecraft thing, or that sort of bug hadn't struck him yet.
Yep.
Now, when I listen to Nahab, I'm like, man, he just decided to go all in on this Lovecraft, and that is where his heart and mind is. And hallucinogen seems very much like this melodic, smooth, easygoing. I wasn't a huge fan of that record just because it felt like the most accessible within
by
his catalog.
far, yeah.
And now it's just like he's completely diving into something that's sort of pulling from different parts of his sound. But I think sonically there's a whole lot more shared between these two Disharmonium records.
For sure.
But I do want to make one more point. What's interesting when you compare it with the 7/7 series is those three records felt distinct in their sonic characters.
Yes. Yep.
Right. You had Sex, which was coming from a little bit more of like what we associated with Blut Aus Nord in the past. Desanctification was this trip hoppy electronica sort of thing.
Industrial
and then
thing.
Cosmosity was like these big epic flowing sort of prog black
epic,
metal stuff. So all had these very clearly well identified sort of sonic characteristics that separated them within the same series. I don't think that's going on here. I think he's tied much more, in my opinion, to a little bit like a connective narrative that's established by Lovecraft into the world he wants to build, whereas the 7/7 series he was creating on his own. So he's not pulling from a direct influence. But we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. Anything sort of you want to follow up here? Like, I guess the next logical question is, do you think we're going to get a third record in this series?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll give you the floor here, Geoff.
No doubt. That's coming. I would argue, quite frankly, that Lovecraftian Echoes could be the second and Nahab the third. I would argue that pretty vociferously. He claims it's not. You said you hadn't listened to it a while. Peter, did you listen to it?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Go listen to it in the next day or so and tell me I'm wrong. You can tell me I'm wrong. I've been wrong a lot in my life, but I'm telling you right now, that transitional midpoint, which came out in September of 22, and I believe it only came out as digital, or did it come out as a physical?
I think it's only digital.
Limited. Okay. I can't remember, but maybe
the
it is.
Oracle says only digital, so.
Okay, only digital. That makes a little bit of sense. But if you listen to that album, you tell me that doesn't tie in to what you're hearing from Undreamable to Nahab. I think it does completely. Yes, I think there's no doubt there will be a third part. Probably not a fourth because he seems to like the number 3. He likes to work in the trilogy sense. I wanted to reiterate or agree with you, Kellen. Hallucinogen was 1,000,000% a transitional album. It was something he had to get out of his system. Unlike you, I never heard any similarities between Hallucinogen and Undreamable. I just didn't hear that at all. But that's me. I Hallucinogen was an uplifting, very much what you said, a very accessible album for him, a very positive sounding album, a very grand sounding album, and then we come to Undreamable, and it's almost somewhat impenetrable and very ugly. And so, I didn't hear that similarities that you did, and I'm not sure if you're going to get into that with your later commentary, but so that's definitely a third one, no doubt.
Yeah, reading about the short story that he's based it on from Lovecraft. I don't think this is finished, because if it is, I think it's cut out part of the story. I think it's going to move into the final. I know it wasn't in chapters, but the final phase of that there particular story. It's based on. Well, I believe it's based on the dreams in the witch house.
Okay, what is it? The dreams of the witch house?
The dreams in the witch house.
Oh, in the witch house. Okay, so it's not based on the Call of Cthulhu, then, you think?
It's part of the Cthulhu mythos series.
Okay,
I think he was writing about. So it's because there is a connection between the title of this album and one of the songs on the previous one.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the second to last track on Undreamable Abysses is this Keziah Mason.
Okay.
And it's all the character also goes by the name Nahab in the story. It's this witch character. So there's definitely a lot of references from that specific Lovecraftian story here.
Okay.
And that I had no I did not know that was going to be a central focus until we get Nahab, and it appears twice.
Okay.
And so I'm like, okay, this is, and then it's starting, like to Peter's point, it's sort of taking shape. I think when we get into like the comparisons of the tracks, I guess the distinction I saw between Hallucinogen and Abysses was this kind of dream state. I think we talked a lot about like to Peter's opening comments. I know you probably shared similar thoughts when we did our deep dive, Geoff. Is Hallucinogen, there was like this uplifting sense of like triumphance, right? Like that's where it felt like it was going that direction, but it also was like very much in his cosmic spatial sort of world, right?
Cosmic and spatial, yep.
Right.
Interstellar.
Where this record, Undreamable Abysses, while however Lovecraft inspired, to me it shared a similar kind of space and like opacity, right? Like it just felt much like a dream, but on the other end of the spectrum. And I think that was the give and take. It was, you had this like uplifting positivity, joyless horror, and it was coming through Lovecraft, but I didn't know that he was going to double down on that. And then we get the subsequent releases, right? A digital release and this next record that comes along. Yeah. And now we know that's going to be a major focus for him.
There's a narrative here with this series, right? Yeah.
Right.
And so I mean, like you said, Hallucinogen is it's the interstellar, it's the ethereal, it's the out here, up there. And Undreamable is the horror down there. So, if you want to get into a Dante's Inferno sort of thing, it's the fucking sub-level of sub-level of sub-level of hell, whereas hallucinogen is you're still up here breathing air. Down there, you're breathing in the gaseous obnoxiousness of death all the time, right?
Right. Right. Um, so speaking of like these key elements that we're talking about, I guess the next thing I wanted to bring up when we're considering this record and um, previous one is now that we've had two opportunities to sort of see Vindsval explore this Lovecraft sound, what do you think? Like when you look at the entirety of the catalog, um, where do you see him pulling from? Like what do you see him leaving out? What is he omitting in terms of the sounds that he's explored? What do you see him pulling from previous records and sort of reintroducing into this sort of Lovecraft context? I'm just curious, now that you're all well acquainted with the entirety of his discography, what records do you hear, not only here on Nahab, but also on Undreamable Abysses? Peter, I'm going to let you jump to this one and we'll get you going.
Okay. Well, on the initial spin of Nahab, I had a very strong sense of Mort around it. Though with subsequent listens, that started to subside a little because I went back to Mort to give it a bit of a spin. And like we discussed in the deep dive, Mort is just one of those albums where there's so much going on around you, you can't really grab on to anything. It's such a fluid, slithery type album that it is so difficult to just grasp what's going on. So then I started to get more a feeling of the work which transforms God. I mean, mystical beast more than anything in his catalogue. For me, that's what I've been hearing from it, and I think compositionally from the previous album, I think he's just made minor tweaks to this, and just brought a bit more sort of intensity where there was a bit more, I thought, more suspense in the previous album. And I talked about like there's something lurking, something around. I got this feeling like you're in a building or something, and I didn't realize the story. So he's talking about a witch house and the different rooms, and there's different tenants in this house, and he's having these dreams at night where he's going into this other world and he meets the witch Nahab. I feel that this is the part of the story where he's met her, and the evil, the fear, the ominous feeling has arrived at his room, and he's had this dream, and he's been brought into this dreamlike state and other world where he's starting to meet these other characters. That was the feelings I got from it anyway. But
Okay, so Geoff, I'm gonna let you take this this question, and then Devin has a question for us, so I want to answer his question.
Yeah. So just so I'm clear, are we on question 2 or 3?
Yeah. I guess this is more 3.
More 3. Okay. So for 2, we were kind of alluding to which direction we think it was going. So we talked about that with, is there a third one? Yeah. What I hear in particular with DUA, I'm going to call it DUA, Disharmonium, Undreamable Abysses, versus DN, is in DUA, what I hear is a tremendous amount of omnipresent dread. It is just thick with horror. There's very little room for maneuvering a lot of sonics as far as like the guitar and the keyboards. It's all one big thick ball of eeriness and scariness. And I'm gonna say one thing here. A year ago, when that album came out, a little over a year ago, somebody posted it on their YouTube channel. It's that black metal channel. He posts all the black metal stuff. I forget what he's called, but the Black Metal Vault or something. And this is what I said about that album. I said a trip inside a hallucinogenic nightmare of walls crawling with acidic liquids from decomposing life forms living and breathing death's very essence. This shit is psychedelic madness in musical form. Crazy good, likely album of the year for me. That did not turn out to be the case. However, my words sort of still, when I saw that, when I pulled this up on YouTube and saw my comment 18 months later or 16 months later or whatever, I'm like, I wonder if I still feel the same. And I did, and I do. What I hear is the oppressive horror and abject insanity of Mort, coupled with a good bit of the return of the work that transforms, because that had kind of gone away in the in the 777 trilogy. We didn't hear as much of that bendy, warped, that kind of stuff. Wasn't I sound like a dying cat there, but it's a sound you can't create with your mouth. You have to be able to do it with manipulation of processing and keyboards and bend wheels and pitch shifting and all that kind of shit. But that had gone away, and it certainly wasn't on Hallucinogen at all, okay, or Saturnian Poetry, or any of these recent albums, Cosmosophy. That had disappeared, but it came back. Now, on DUA, I feel it's far more synthesizer, software-based manipulation of that work that transforms sound, as opposed to guitar-centric. It's far more synthi focused as opposed to the guitar sound. It's there, but everything's locked together in this thick ooze of horridness, basically. Nahab is not that way. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but Nahab, there's a lot more separation. It's far more guitar centric. And yes, there are actual tracks that kind of are a mixture of all the things he does best, but we don't have as much of that warped, almost dying sound of what death might be like if you could actually hear it happening, right? If you could hear death happening, it's what I envision what Blut Aus Nord does so well that nobody else really ever has before or after. So there's that. And so I definitely hear elements of the first two 777 albums, namely some of the thematic stuff in sects, not sex, but as I can't say the word well, sects, SECTS, and desanctification. I hear bits and pieces of that in Undreamable and even in Nahab. But what I also don't hear is kind of the more complex rhythmic stuff going on that was on those two albums. I don't hear that as much on Undreamable nor Nahab. It's more. That's one thing where I'll say that a lot of the rhythmic patterns on these two albums are not as adventurous as he's been in the past. They're a little more straightforward. Not that they're four on the floor, but they're just a little bit more palatable as opposed to the industrial sound of Desanct or the complex weirdness of sex, right?
Right.
So there's that, and then more definitely and work to transform. Those are the elements that I hear. And then I just want to say real quickly, I know I'm too fucking chatty. I think we need to point to Lovecraftian Echoes here as the album that came out in September 2002. If I'm honest, that's kind of 2.5 of this series, or 1.5. I hear it. I definitely hear it. It's a lot more guitar centric than DUA, and it's maybe not quite as a mixture of the two as Nahab is. So yeah, it's we're not talking ABBA here. This is not that kind of thing, right? We're not hearing when I say Nahab has more song structure than DUA, and I really think it does. We're not talking ABBA songs here, okay, kids? This is still a clusterfuck in your head, always, and that's what he does when he gets into this stuff. I put it this way. To me, it's very much in keeping the second Lovecraftian Echoes in the trilogy sound overall, and has a definitive work that transforms God vibe, mixed with Nahab and that sliding, whining, broken guitar synth bending thing that you hear is a production staple that he employs when he wants to create these atmospheres of dread. It's like nobody does that. It's what he does. I'd say it in a weird way. I'd almost say it's kind of a production trick that he relies on for this kind of presentation of this kind of music that he wants to do. But that's kind of what I hear going on overall as far as past references in the present.
Okay. So I'll just jump in here quick. I agree with I'll just want to take an issue, or not issue, but the point that you made about the sort of the rhythmic aspect to these records. One of the things that we always wanted was to get like a live drummer in the studio, right?
Right.
Like, I do feel that both Disharmonium records, there is sort of a consistent drumming presence going on. And that's something that sort of transitions how we hear like the rhythm aspect to these records. They feel a little bit more like you don't have him curating the way you could on potentially a drum machine.
Well, let me ask you a question on that. I'm glad you brought that up. Do you feel, listening to both these Disharmonium records, that you're clearly sure this is a live drummer?
To a greater...
I'm not sure about that. I'm really not.
Go ahead, Peter.
I think, well, you talked a lot about rhythm. That's something I picked up. You say it's very sort of guitar-centric record, but I listen to it over and over again. I'm starting to hear those rhythms come through more and more. The pounding rhythm, it's almost as if Godflesh was a bit more organic. It's coming through. That's why I was coming back to sort of work which transforms God, because that's where the Godflesh touches start sort of coming into his sound, and then mixed with mystical bass with the riffs were sort of like not monotonous, but it's just that trance-like feeling coming over and over again. But yeah, I'd listen to these. I was going, is this a live drummer? But then I don't know. The cymbals didn't sound like it's
the reason
a real
I
drum
ask
kit.
is the reason I asked both you guys what your impression of that is because Saturnian poetry and hallucinogen, you can tell it's a real drummer. I can tell, and I'm not the greatest drummer in the world, but I can hear the nuances of drumming, in particular on Saturnian, okay, which he actually mentions it, in the album credits.
Right.
But in listening to both these albums 4 times, I'm just not entirely sure.
Right, but you could listen to Desanctification and you clearly knew.
Oh, you knew it was.
Yeah.
Same with Sex as well, for sure. Right.
Like I don't know, for example, what you can do now with a drum machine is so advanced that they're able to pull it off. I don't feel the same level of like compositional focus surrounding like a drum machine that you do on previous albums. At least
I agree.
And then it's interesting you mentioned Saturnian poetry, because that also that's a familiar black metal sort of context.
Yes.
So I don't know, because his guitar style is so warped, if that informs how I hear the rest of the record. Like if I had traditional black metal guitar sitting on top of it, would I automatically be able to identify? But
I think I think too, real quick, Kellen, go back and listen to these again this week, just once each, or a couple tracks, and really focus on the drums and listen to the way, for example, on Disharmonium DUA, to me, there's a much, much, much more. The mix is much muddier, much thicker, much denser than on Nahab. So on Nahab, I kind of think it might be a real drummer. On DUA, I'm just not sure, and I'm not entirely sure on Nahab either. But I just kept listening to it, going, "Is this a real drummer?" Because, but you said the one thing you mentioned that makes me think maybe it was is that the shit that was going on Sex and Desanctification was so over the top crazy that with regards to all the changing, you just knew it was like no fucking drummer can do that, like the way that's happening. So you knew that's what it was. But on these two, I'm not entirely sure, and I'm not saying it is or it isn't. Apparently, it is a full band, so I don't know.
Okay, well, we got a couple of questions here, so I want to shout out to the chat. So, Devins has a questions in terms of like working in threes. Is this his third different series? So, do you guys think that he'll ever just will continue to do series, or will just do one-offs going forward? Like, do you think this is going to be a consistent pattern through the rest of his career, or do you think he'll just get to the point where he's just doing one record at a time sort of deal?
Well, I think that, we don't really even know how old this guy is. He could be my age. He could be pushing 60. He might be, he might have been recording since he was, well, wait a minute. How old was he when
We think he's born in 79, 80.
He was born in 79. Because
so he's early,
you talked
early
about
mid-40s.
that one interim album and he was like 15, right? Was that the first
Apparently
one?
he would compose Ultimate Third Day. He was about 15.
15. Okay, so he's born in 79. So he's in his 40s then, right? So he's got quite a long amount of time to go. I think that he's kind of kept this sort of routine going now in the last 20 years, or roughly 15 years, where he's doing a trilogy and then he's doing these interim albums, or as you so accurately put it, Kellen, transitional albums, where he wants to kind of harken back to either a black metal thing or a Mort thing, or like, wouldn't shock me at all if he ends up doing like Mort's Part 3 or Part 2 in the next, after this series is over. But I don't, Devin, I think he's probably going to do a one-off. Well, I think he's going to do the third part of this Lovecraft cycle, and then I wouldn't be shocked to see him do one or two other albums. And he's also got the Forhist thing. I don't know whether he'll return to that or Jerusalem. He's got that thing with the Gost guy, right? The keyboardist. And so who knows, man? Who knows with this guy? He's just sort of this enigma that, we've seen one picture of him that's kind of like a silhouette sort of thing, and he didn't look anything like I expected him to. I expected him to have hair down to his waist and be wearing like a Viking horn helmet, and he's like some dude that looks like he's bald, and he looks like a college professor teaching fucking law at some university or something like that. I was like, what the fuck? How's that guy this guy? You know what I mean? So sorry,
here, Peter.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in the deep dive we said that at the end of it we think we know him, but he surprises us, but then we expect to be surprised. I don't know. I don't know if he has a thing with threes or not. I mean, I don't think Memoria Fasusa was ever supposed to be a trilogy. I know he did say in the first one that he was going to make the second part, but it was years later.
Right.
I don't know if he's going to dig deeper into Lovecraft, and there's plenty of other stories he could probably maybe explore, or else he might do that with that new project that was mentioned in the chat, Lovecraftian Echoes. Maybe use that as vehicle for those stories.
Yeah, he brought Jordan brought that up, and I remember now reading that was kind of going to be its own entity. Yet, I don't know, Jordan. You seem like you're familiar with this with BAN, and I don't know what your take is, you can put it in the comments. But man, I hear a lot of Disharmonium in that album. So, and what I read actually on on the Bandcamp page, that it was definitely stated that it's not part of the trilogy. It's not part of the Disharmonium group. But I hear a whole lot of Disharmonium, and I'm sorry, I just do. And so, thank you for informing us that there was a drummer, an actual session drummer on there. And you mentioned that there's an LP. That sparked my remembrances that I think there was a very limited run of something. Or am I wrong about that? That there was a physical product at one point in time. Kellen, you said it says on there.
I've only seen digital. Yeah, I've only seen digital for it.
I could have swore I saw that they made. Maybe I'm wrong. Jordan says about the LP, so maybe I'm misconstruing what he means by LP. But because now I'm confused whether I thought I saw that there was physical very briefly for it or what. So Jordan, if you could kind of fill me in on that, please. Sorry, I don't mean to dominate, but I my mind's kind of doing the hamster wheel thing on all that. How about you?
Yeah, I just would say that it's interesting the way he's sort of splintering off, right? Like Forhis sort of takes care of the more traditional black metal side of things. Jerusalem seemed to be the outlet for the more industrial sound that he wanted to. Yeah. So Lovecraftian echoes, I don't know if that will develop, something into itself. And where he'll sort of siphon off his inspirations for this kind of material into that project. But the fact that we're all at least in agreement that we would not be surprised if there's a Disharmonium Part 3.
Oh, I'd honestly bet my entire CD collection on it. So there you go. That's how sure I am of it.
Would you venture into that bet, Peter, or are you going to hold on to?
You guys will have to pay the shipping.
Man. Yeah, not usually a betting man, but I would certainly expect another Disharmonium album.
Okay.
Just saying, if I lose that bet, you guys have to pay all the shipping, and there's only 4,000 CDs. So good luck with that. So.
Okay. So I kind of, in the group of questions that I posed to you guys leading into this, we've kind of gone through all of them. We addressed question number 4 that we previously, in our comments. So I think we can let that go. Now I need to get Geoff out of here at 8 o'clock, right?
No, 9.
9.
Yeah.
So we got plenty of time then to chat.
Yep.
So let's, before we get into the track listing, I just wanted to, you mentioned something that I wanted to bring up, I guess both of you. Meaning, I think Geoff, you mentioned how this is a bit more of a guitar focused record.
Nahab.
Yeah, Nahab.
Yes. Yeah.
And Peter mentioned that Undreamable Abysses, there was kind of this constant sense of tension.
Yes.
And I think that's, like, to me, the biggest difference I hear when I was sort of comparing the two records going into this was that Undreamable Abysses there's a lack of, like, dynamic range.
Exactly. I say that.
Of tension. Right. So in the same way, like a great horror movie, there's this persistent sense of like something's looming around the corner. Your description about walking around a house and not, knowing what to find. Like one of the things that made Undreamable Abysses a bit more challenging for me as a listen was that persistent sense of like, there's not a lot of release on that record. And
it's a lot of continuous sort of, the continuum is sort of similar. There's not as much, you use the word dynamics. It's not up, it's not down. It's all sort of one tone throughout.
Where I think Nahab does a better job.
Yes.
Of giving, we have a couple of sort of instrumental breaks, if you will. All of them
interludes,
being, these hideous dream odes, I believe is what they're titled. That kind of opus, hideous dream opus, that kind of break things up a little bit. But even the songs themselves, I think, do a better job. I don't know if he's just honing the songwriting for this style, or if there's a different kind of message that he wants to drive home, like a different kind of environment or impression he wants to leave that would divide the two records. I'm just curious, did you have a similar impression in terms of comparison and contrast between the two?
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, how do I? Okay, let me see if I can use this analogy. For me, Undreamable Abysses is kind of if you're watching that sine wave, it's one continuous wave with very little undulations in it. It's kind of a continuous sort of thread of sound that's dense, thick with dread, and is trying to create an environment of psychological and physical terror. And whereas on the Nahab, there's much more kind of tension and release state. And I wouldn't even say that the interludes play a big role in that. The interludes are a nice little release, yes, but the tracks themselves, there is much more dynamics to them. There's more ebb and flow and intensity and release. There's even some moments on Nahab where you get scaled back guitar that's almost clean, which you rarely get in Blut Aus Nord, and you never get that on Undreamable Abysses. It's just this omnipresent, sentient thing that's just hanging all over you, you know. So that's where I came from on those two. Yeah.
Peter, any thoughts, differences?
Oh yeah, no, very similar thoughts, and when I watched back our live stream and we were talking about the first album, and I mentioned about being in the house and that you feel that there's something evil, something horrific's going on around you in other rooms, and you're constantly waiting for it to arrive at your door, but it never does, and it's that psychological sort of torture. I think I referenced the film Hostel, so that you've awoken in the room and you're tied to the chair, and you don't know where you are, and you hear all this stuff. So for me, when I before I read about this actual Lovecraftian story, first few impressions of listening to this album, I thought, right, the door's just opened, and someone's starting to work on me with their tools, and the horror has arrived at my door. Basically, that's the feeling I got. Obviously, when I read into the story, I thought there's interesting sort of parallels there, because the guy's gone to the house, he's a tenant, he rents a room, and then he starts hearing these noises at night and the voices and stuff, and then it's that tension, and then he starts going into the dream world and then this other world, and that's where he sees the true sort of horrors of it. So that, yeah, very similar being to these guys, that this is where it's hit home, basically. So the horror has arrived.
If there was because we don't get any lyrics with these albums, if there's ever a need to do some fan fiction, I know there may be a place for you, Peter. You can write an entire novel.
Yeah,
I come up with my own worlds, like Ultimate Thule.
I have to say this. You two guys are far, far too cerebral for an idiot like me. I don't belong in this conversation of talking about like storylines. I just go, me like music, me scared. I just, when you get into the whole narrative thing, it's like, I used to be that way as a Neil Peart fan, of course. But man, now it's like, man, this is so much work. When you guys are drawing a narrative onto these songs, I'm like, okay, why? I'm not getting it, but they are, and they're both getting it, so it makes sense to me. You get what I'm saying? Like, for me, it's a base level thing about the music and what's going on, because you can't ever really understand lyrics from them anyways. You know, there aren't any that we. Yeah,
that's what I've enjoyed about these discussions, is that I'm not a musician, so when it comes to talking about the actual music, my vocabulary is quite limited. well, that's a good drum sound there. That's good guitars. You know, yourself, Geoff, you go into more of the compositional and the actual notes and maybe the
Yeah.
notes that aren't being played and all the rest of it. Where
Yeah.
for me, music is just a release for everyday life. And you go into it, depends on your mood. You listen to different types of music, and this is the type of music where I just go into whatever world my mind takes me in it. And I
Yeah.
don't know what he's singing about because he doesn't do that many interviews. He doesn't have lyrics. So actually then starting to read about, because you get that connection obviously with the song title. I looked up with Nahab and I got the connection to the Kenzia Mason. So started to read up on it, and then they say, well, if this is what he's basing it on, there are some parallels to what I experienced, but ultimately the sort of maybe the form's different than what the actual intention was.
I have a compendium of Lovecraft that's this thick. It's got literally every fucking thing that Lovecraft has written. Guess how far I've gotten in that thing? I'm embarrassed to say it. I've had it for 10 years. I've gotten the first story read.
Well,
I may sound like a smart guy, but I'm a very dumb guy when it comes to that. I just don't enjoy reading like I wish I did, like I used to as a younger man. And Lovecraft is incredible, but I like for you guys to talk about, well, I hear this and he's referencing that and all that stuff. It doesn't happen for me that way anymore. I don't know why, sadly, you know.
so you mentioned, Peter, you feel like the door has opened, right? And we get a character here. So, it's interesting doing some research for this. This Nahab character, this witch. So she was in conversation with the dark man, I believe is the term they use in Lovecraft. And I wonder if that's where this is coming from. Because to your point of like the door opening and getting a bit of like a new page has been turned, not just in terms of the story, but also the characters involved. I think that's what's interesting about this record. I don't feel it's the same dream world. I think you're a bit more rooted in a particular place during the course of this record. And
Right.
I wonder, bringing in Nahab and hear this reference to the black man, I think that's this artistic depiction on the record. If I had to guess, that's where I would go.
Yeah.
And
Which one did you get, Kellen? Real quick, did you get the?
I don't think I got the special edition.
You didn't get the
I got
limited
a
with
gatefold here, but
the slipcase.
no slipcase on mine.
All right, I'll show mine when we get to that in a minute here. Then.
But that was kind of the lasting sort of impression it was made. Is I did feel like we got now a character was introduced, and it provided a little bit more like a shift in tone in the record. Instead of that like world where you're sort of drifting in a nightmare dream, this feels like now you're face to face with some sort of threat.
Someone. Yeah. Do you just a question to both of you. Are either of you very familiar with Lovecraft's works, or have you read him, or no? Okay. Yeah.
Regrettably, no. I've always known about him, and it's always something I want to dive into, but I didn't
So I
really know
have
where to
one
start.
up on you. I have one story read.
And this is making me want to now go and probably give it a story as a good read.
I'm going to pull that out and show you guys.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting when they talk about the witch, is that the describer of having this kind of croaking voice. So I'm starting to equate that with the how should I put it, the gurgling sort of guttural vocals that are throughout. Is that her? Like, is that him?
That like pitch shifted, right? Like it sounds like it's some sort of an affect that you got on Mort, right? There was like a layering to the vocal style here, but I do think, to your point, Peter, I agree. Like it might be trying to specifically articulate a character within the story.
Yeah.
There you go. I wasn't lying.
Ah, very good.
I have actually. I might have gotten further than I thought. It looks like I actually. Oh, look at this. I made it to page 36. I lied. I actually read a couple more stories than I thought. Now, it's interesting to note there are 1,000 pages in this, so I've only got oh, I don't know, 16 more years of reading to do, but we're getting there slowly but surely. But yeah, I mean, it's, I agree with you, Kellen, that the figure on Nahab, which did you say that's the black man? Okay.
Yeah, the dark man, the black
The
man.
dark man? Okay. May have allowed him to, you know, go in a different artistic license with that character to start to play out some of this. So could that mean that we're actually looking at it more than 3 parts? Who knows? You know, I mean, I don't know if we want to conjecture that at this point. That's pretty out there. But yeah, it's
Okay. So at this point, I think we're ready to kind of jump into the tracks here. I'll just play a brief clip for us to look over or listen to, and then I know, depending on what, if we have any specific sort of experiences or memories of the track and that you want to add in, and we can kind of talk briefly about them. On the opening, I had the first, which is the intro, Hideous Dream Opus number 1. So we're going to jump here into the meat of the album. The second track is entitled Mental Paralysis. So I'll play that here for us to listen to. Like right off the bat for me, that it brings back that you're talking about with like a mystical beast or works with transforms, that sort of guitar bending sound.
yeah.
I first heard it, I was like, okay, we're kind of in a similar place. But as we get on here, I think the dream part of this record starts to dissipate a little bit.
On Nahab?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. Were we gonna I just want to make one thing
Sure.
understood here. Do we, since I'm kind of forgetting, and pardon my memory here, but I guess we did talk about Disharmonium, the first part, DUA, when we did the last deep dive, but I kind of approached this, as I said before we went live, in sort of a comparison of the two, right? And so how are you planning to lay yours out there? Were you just going to talk about Nahab tracks?
Yep. I'm just going to talk. I just have the Nahab tracks for us.
Okay.
But if you want to compare,
And then I went through a lot of extra because I was kind of looking at both of them because I kind of forgot. I should have done what Peter did. I should have went back and looked at what we did on Disharmonia DUA, because I don't remember us doing that deep of a deep dive on it. And if I remember correctly, I believe I even said I didn't get that album at that point in time. And I think I said I was in a pretty dark place to listen to that. And I didn't really spend a lot of time with that. Yeah.
To be fair, I think we both said that. And I can't remember if you said the same, Kellen, but I'd said I hadn't given it enough real time. But what I did note down here, and interestingly listening back to On Dreamable Abysses over the last week or so, I got the feeling that maybe the final track, the apotheosis of the unnameable, is almost like a lead-in to Nahab. And I was trying to remember when the deep dive, we talked about that on an earlier album. I didn't have my notes around, so I couldn't remember which one, which was like a final track of one of the albums led into another one around the sort of Mort Odinist period.
The one that I remember specifically was actually when we started the 7/7 series. The sex track, the epitome number 1, that sounded completely like, to me, Mystical Beast of Rebellion.
Yeah.
But when we got to the second track, it felt like the page had turned.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And that was a moment for me where during that we were sort of recalling where I felt like that you have this transition or a song that is deliberately or almost explicitly recalling a previous album, and then he'll sort of turn on a dime and say, like, this is the direction that I want to head on this record. That was the one for me, at least, that I remember.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to read off what I say about Disharmonium. Maybe I'll go back. I had some great write-ups here, but I feel like you guys don't want to hear me talk about
No.
each track from that album. But I mean, you know, for me, going back to that album and putting some time into it now, when I really wasn't I wasn't ready, because by the time we did all of the albums and I got to Undreamable, I was pretty spent. If you remember, I said to you, and Peter said it at the outset of today's episode, I'm like, man, I might have to kill myself if I have to listen to Blut Aus Nord again for like another 6 months to a year. I don't think I ever want to go near any of this shit. And I love Blut Aus Nord, but I don't think I want to go near any of this shit for at least 6 months. I believe that's what I said, something paraphrasing myself. But so I kind of went back to this album, and you know, what I came up with was, you know, that, and maybe I'll just read the first one here, Chance of the Deep, because quite frankly, I think this could kind of apply for most of that album, and I'm going to do that one first because I think it encompasses the album before I get to Nahab. A swirling miasma of dense sonic evil oozing into your ear holes with surgical precision, infecting you with dread and a dizzying sense that nothing you hear is actually real. Bending notes from minor to major to painfully stretched and warped textures of sound that should not and do not truly exist except in the twisted mind of Vindsval, who isn't really interested in whether you will ever sleep peacefully again after hearing this infectious creature he's created or dreamed up from his own internal nightmare. That's kind of my honest perception of the whole album, and then I kind of tie it up at the end. I gave it like a 9.25, and I said my only minor complaint about this album is a relative lack of dynamics and variety in the songs, which is kind of what you more or less alluded to there, Kellen. I understand that they are a piece to be taken in their entirety, but there is a consistent sameness to all of the tracks on this album that by the end of the 46:18 mark, I'm grateful it's over before I jump off a bridge to my death. This isn't for the faint of heart. And I mean that about that album. It's just not a particularly pleasant listen. And it goes back to the mixing and melding of Mort and Work That Transforms with a little bit more of something extra evil going on. And so I think the only other thing that I might add in there is that you know, there's a lack of melodicism in Undreamable that I actually can say I do hear a bit of on Nahab. I hear a bit of melodic guitar lines that get in here and you go, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's pretty cool. Yes, there's a lot of similar textures throughout, but there seems to be more space in Nahab that there really isn't in Undreamable. It's just one. If you think of when they say brick walling, right? It's just that you open up an audio file and it's just all bars. This one seems to have some of this going on with Nahab, whereas Undreamable doesn't. And so you just have a lot of cacophony going on in Undreamable that is also, again, mixed in almost like a sludgy undertone where everything's just gridlocked. You know what I mean? That's the only word I can come up with is gridlock. Like, it's like, man, this track wants to move somewhere, but it's locked in this sort of grip of ugliness, you know?
So do you have anything to add, Peter? Because I've got some thoughts on what Geoff has to say there.
No, you go ahead, Cal.
Yeah, I have a similar sort of impression. What I got was like it's sort of a ripple effect, where in Undreamable Abysses the songs, it's like one part ripples and then it continues to oscillate, and then you get another wave comes along, but it's all happening on the same plane.
Yes.
Where they kind of wash over each other, and but it's all essentially they run into each other, they pull away, they come back. It's that kind of dynamic. You don't get so I guess vertically, right? You send this sense of scale and space. You have a very broad horizon, but
Yes.
you don't get this sort of like quiet, loud,
Yeah.
explosive, very slow. Like those kind of dynamics aren't as obvious or don't present themselves to the same degree. Because I just heard vocals and riffs and bent guitar and everything just kind of washing over one another. So
Yeah, it's all like a thick soup.
right. Where I think, and I don't know, I guess to get back to this track here, did you know immediately listening to Nahab that this was going to be a difference, or how long did it take you? Here we are on our second song. Does it feel at this point different for you listening to it?
For me or Peter?
For either one of you. Both of you can have at
Say
it.
that again. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to Pete.
How, like, we've talked about the differences between this record. So between Undreamable Abysses and Nahab, how long
Right.
did it take you before you sort of noticed that?
Right away on the second song.
Okay.
Yeah. Right away. It was like, oh, wait, there's much more separation and sonic space in Nahab that I didn't hear on Undreamable. And that's not to say Undreamable's bad. It's not. It's just, again, it's that sonic thick soup that you're hearing where there just isn't much. And you put it perfectly, as you always do. It's the breadth of it is wide like this, but it's all on the same plane. Whereas Nahab, I was definitely hearing some vertical, up. There was a lot more to it. Now there are one or two tracks on Nahab that get a little like, and I'll get into that when I do my track by track. But I don't, as a whole, I don't hear it like I hear DUA at all. It's very similar but extremely different, if that makes any sense. And it's only similar in that it's Blut Aus Nord, and it's that thing that he and only he does. There's nobody else that sounds like this guy. I mean, there just isn't. And I have a couple little notes in up the track by track where I reference some contemporaries that I was like, oh, well, that's a little new. That sounds like, and we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, he just does the Vindsval thing, and nobody else does that.
Okay, so we're gonna, unless Peter, do you have anything to add there? Or would you like to move on to our next track?
No, I just had basically I wrote bang ! We're straight into the mental turmoil. The pummeling drums, the swirling riffs, the escalating and de-escalating sort of harmonies throughout the track, and then those hideous sounding vocals then start to come in, the gurgling, and then you hear the faint voices throughout the track as well, which, again, reading about the story, is supposed to be what the character encounters when he goes into the dream state in this interdimension.
I just want to make sure I'm clear, because I don't think I am. And I apologize, because it kind of is my illness. Are you going to actually pull up each track with a sound clip?
I am.
Okay. Hold on a sec then. Hold on. You're going to hate what I have to say, but I have something more to say. All right. So let me just...
We're on the same page going forward now.
No, now I know. I didn't know that I was supposed to talk about mental paralysis. All right. So let me read, because I did a pretty thorough sort of stream of consciousness thought process about how I would explain these tracks. So mental paralysis, noting, and I'll be interested to see what you say here. And then right away, it's in the first line. Noting strong Gorguts Obscura-like vibes here, as well as DSO angular dissonance, but it's more streamlined and less swirling and synthy and droning compared to Undreamable Abysses. It's more cacophonous and intentionally evil and bludgeoning versus oozing and crawling. This is more lurching, but forward moving and has more form and substance than DUA. That tremolo pick melody is truly hypnotic and trance-inducing in a cool, horrifying way versus the DUA formula killer tracks. Make sense?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And there's one song on this record that I thought Obscura, Gorguts, like there's a brain melter in here. We'll get there later on.
Okay, yeah. Well, I hear it very much on Mental Paralysis right away.
But yeah, I completely agree with that. What I didn't probably grab right off the bat, but I felt like the sense of like the production here was a standout.
Yes.
There's a greater sense of like separation in between the instruments, which I think I enjoyed that about this record, and it made it a little bit more engaging to me as a listen, as opposed to letting it spill on over me. So,
Yep.
They're slightly more conventional, but in the context of Vindsval's world, when I say conventional.
yeah. Okay. So let's move on here. We got our third track. This is The Endless Multitude. Hell yeah. Okay.
You don't want to anger the gods of YouTube and be yanked, do you?
I'm trying to play along by the rules here.
Yeah.
But I mean, this for me was the like turning point track on the record.
Yep. Agreed.
There's a few really key moments. So we get there, that like quiet, clean guitar that explodes into something. And then maybe even the best riff on this entire track comes in the closing like 30 seconds. It feels like it picks up into something explosive again. It's one of my favorite moments on the entire album, but it just sort of leaves you in the cliffhanger at the very end. It just drops off a cliff kind of deal. So this, if I was to recommend a track initially that serves as a proper example that separates these two records, this is going to be the first one that I'd recommend anyone check out. So if you are new to this album, if you heard Undreamable Abysses and you're curious about what's different on Nahab, I would absolutely recommend checking out, or at least streaming The Endless Multitude here on Nahab. But I will let you jump in, Geoff, and you can give us your thoughts here.
Okay. If you recall, back when we talked, I believe it was about hallucinogen. Was that the Peter? You guys are going to remember this way better than I do. I just run at the mouth, and I don't remember anything. You guys know that. After.
We know the story. We know the drill.
Right. But I do come up with some entertaining shit. So the thing that do you guys remember, were we talking about hallucinogen when I said I feel like I'm riding on the back of a dragon in a loincloth over?
Was it? That was Cosmosophy. That was your
Cosmosophy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes. Okay.
Your lakes of gasoline. Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
If the shoe fits, wear it, bitches. All right. So you're not going to get any of that with any of these songs. That's just not happening. But I did really pull out my inner Shakespeare, I think, on some of these explanations. So The Endless Multitude, I agree with you. It along with The Queen of the Damned are the kind of the two denouement tracks, the big monster tracks that just jumped out and grabbed me. And this one is full of cascading dissonant minor chords colliding and crashing into each other with tons of killer tremolo picked howling, angularly crawling melody lines. Very guitar-centric so far, crushingly heavy, hanging suspended chords and eerie synths over abyssal choral chants. And by that, I mean they just sound like you can reach out and touch them, but they're not there. They're far away, but they come at you, and then they recede. They come at you. And gurgling growls, which we have a lot of this.
Yeah, Peter mentioned that, yeah.
You don't have any discernible stuff. You have this almost like, and it's not discernible. There's no words to it. It's just this gurgling, growling, almost like you were gargling water through
Yeah.
a 10,000 long foot pipe, and it was infected with fucking disease or something, right? You get gurgling growls that hang like poison in the mix of insanity. The guitar lines float in the air until about 4:30 in the track, when the track quiets into singular arpeggiated notes with slithering serpent-like rustlings and creepy howls and subterranean moans and groans that pervade in the distance. They're not right there on top of you. They're in the distance. You can hear them, and they're far away, and then they approach, and then they recede, and you're not sure where they are because it really leaves you feeling unsettled. The lead guitar then enters towards the end, and it's really quite epic, almost on a hallucinogen scale briefly, but in a more sinister way as the track evaporates almost immediately into Hideous Dream Opus number 2.
All right. Peter, anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, well, my actual notes here, Geoff, you talked about the guitar. I really noted down. I thought that the drumming in this track was excellent. I really enjoyed it, and even the bass lines that came through. It gave the song some real power and density for me. And like you said, Geoff, there's those disembodied voices, which I said weave in and out. And you said they were coming and going. You know, that similar type of effect, and then obviously the hideous gurgling sort of returns in this track as well. And the riff seems to lurk all over the song. It's slightly a wee bit disorientating before, it just slows down into that midpoint with some sublime, absolute great tremolo picking. That sort of relieves a wee bit of tension, and then that sudden transition into that stripped down section, the clean pick guitar, gives you some slight respite. But then there's that, like you say, Geoff, there's that fear that stuff. You're waiting for the song to start up again, and you hear like this wee tapping of the cymbals and stuff, and it's like you're waiting for something to come through that door, and then like you had down there, like you mentioned about the vocals. Yeah, I've got slithering vocals are just highlighted here before that lead guitar comes in, and then the blast to see out the song, to see out the sort of fear and the tension and the torture that brings you into obviously the next track, which is complete opposite.
Yeah, for me, the combination here of various guitar techniques worked to the advantage of this song.
Yes.
I loved just getting, like, sure, we have all that like completely contorted, sort of mangled, bent guitar harmonic thing going on that's the signature of his sound. But when you get him playing something cleaner and simpler to contrast it, that give and take, I think, works incredibly well. And and one of the successes of this record by comparison to the previous one. So,
I mean, this song had a bit of cosmosophy in it at times. Not maybe as uplifting and proggy, but it definitely, there was a lot more separation and space and melody to the whole thing. And it was kind of like, yes, it still has the bent, angular, warped thing, but there's more going on here, and there's way more dynamics in these first two tracks than are on the whole album of DUA. There's no question. Yeah.
Okay. So if we don't have anything to add, we have a brief little transition here into the second sort of instrumental or interlude on the album. This is track number 4, Hideous Dream Opus number 2. It's just a great change of pace. I know a lot of times like instrumentals or interludes like that can seem to change the effect of a record or potentially distract. I think they worked incredibly well for how exhausting this style of extreme metal can be. And they're very sparse, right? They don't take very long on the record. They're about a minute or so. So, do you have any? Well, we have one more on this entire album, but do you have any kind of thing to add about these instrumentals and how they sort of played out for you, individual? We'll start with you, Peter, on this one.
Well, for this particular one, I mean, I noted it was a much needed palate cleanser, really, after that initial sort of two, obviously the intro and then the two songs came in. I was like, right, need to take stock here. What's happening? Slightly haunting, obviously, with that church organ and those kind of distant wails. But yeah, it was like, give me a sort of a moment to take stock, but then also think, right, what's coming next? What horror does Vindsval have in store for me now?
Anything you want to throw in there, Geoff?
Yeah, I apologize, man. Paul Masvidal just hit me up.
Oh.
I thought that was kind of a dead thing, and he wants to set something up this week, so I apologize for looking away.
Sure.
Yeah, the interludes are cool. I mean, this one here is kind of this ominous, faraway female operatic sort of voice that's going on. It sounds like it's a million miles away, but yet maybe you could almost reach out and touch it in a weird way. It's very wailing and forlorn and woeful, of course, as you'd expect. But like it's echoing in the void, sort of, kind of, right? And then it heads right into the claustrophobic, dizzying drums and sliding black metal chords of the Crowning Horror, which I think is a super fucking black metal track. It's to me, it's probably the most black metal track on the album, along with maybe Black Vortex. But it's an abrupt, sledgehammer to the fucking head, right?
Okay, well, before we get into that, you set me up perfectly, Geoff. So this is
That's what I do, man.
This is the Crowning Horror track number 5. Man, okay. So I know you kind of jumped into it, Geoff. I'm going to let you just clean up and since you talked about it, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, guys. I feel like I just dominate conversation, and I don't try to. It's just, I can't shut the fuck up about shit like this.
You got it. Okay, the floor is yours. So go ahead and talk about the Crowning Horror.
Yeah, Crowning Horror. Pretty full-on black and death, black metal, buzzing, horrific slashing guitars, and probably the most undreamable abyss sounding song for me on the album. However, the gurgling growls bubbling underneath the dense drums and percussion on here, which are very, very much a black metal type, blast beat type thing, are wretched and just, you get that wretched swarming guitar bursts until the song slows and goes into a real slowed down crawl about 2 minutes in. So it's full-on black metal assault the first 2 minutes, from guitars, synths, the drums, the percussion. And then at 2 minutes 20, it just starts. At 2 minutes, it for about 20 seconds, it lulls you into this false sense of security that, oh, this is going to be a new dynamic to the song. But no, then it bursts into that ascending, sickly, chordal stabbing assault. It's just like it's like the guitars are coming up and they just want to physically assault you, right? They just want to stab you in the chest. And then you get all that double bass blast beats and the gurgling vocals. It's just sick. It's like the sickest, most vile track probably on the album, I think, along with Black Vortex. Those two are kind of the 1 and 1A sort of nastiness of the album, right? And this, again, then points to the fact that there is a much more dynamic shift to this album than you had on UA, which was just kind of all one speed. This has, peaks and valleys that you're not fully expecting, and that's a good thing.
Peter, thoughts?
The first time I listened to this album, this was a song that stood out for me. I absolutely loved it. For me, it's aptly named. It is a crowning horror. The horror has truly arrived now. So all that tension we had in the previous album and the first few tracks here sort of gets us straight into it. But this was it. This is what I've been waiting for. So it was just wave after wave of oppressive, suffocating riffs. It just feels like this song has you pinned down, and there's no sign of escape in sight. It's truly horrific. I just love the atmosphere. Oppressive. Yeah, it's wave after wave that hit me.
The drumming on this one stood out to me. I every time I listen to it, there's something that feels syncopated about the guitar riff and the blast beat that starts the record. That it seems like a great pairing, right? It just doesn't go through like a traditional. It's probably because the way he's phrasing that guitar riff, where it does not sound like a traditional sort of black metal, blast beat guitar line comparison. There's something special in the relationship between the two of them on this track that always grabs my attention when I listen to it. But I guess first and foremost, it does also feel like the fastest track. It's the shortest that's not an interlude.
It's only like three. Isn't it only a little over 3 minutes?
It's like 3.5 minutes long, or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a welcome sort of change of pace, and stylistically, right? Like one of the strengths of a great full length is that individual tracks have their own personality, their own character. And as you go through the listen, you're like, oh, here's this one coming that adds an additional dimension to the listening experience for us. While Undreamable Abysses seems like a statement for a very specific sort of mood throughout, it's difficult to sort of reach in and grab a single track as like, here's a standout that separates itself from the pack. And I think that's what one of the better parts of this record. Nahab has like, you want a punishing fast track from this band, like this is the one you're going to pull out and give to someone.
Yeah, you nailed it, Kellen. That's the signature difference between these two albums. It's still Vindsval, it's still Blut, it's still ugly, it's still claustrophobic and gnarly, but you can't. There's not a lot of differentiation on that first album, and I think the album suffers a little bit for it, to be honest with you. It kind of becomes a little, dare I say it, there's a little bit of a formulaic vibe to that album for me. And, I'll get to that at the very end here. One thing I want to bring up, but this comes in and it just, especially it comes in after this ethereal, interlude that kind of lulls you into a place of not tranquilness, because you don't get that in a Blut Aus Nord album, but it kind of brings the anxiety level down a little bit. It brings the stress down a little bit, and then bam, straight off the bat, it just it sledgehammers you to the face. And while it's doing that, it gets a chainsaw out and it cuts your legs off. So I mean, that's kind of what happens, right?
Yeah.
I just wondered the story is this where the character reveals herself to be Nahab, and what she talks about signing the book as Sapthoth. It's where he really realizes what is going on in this other world.
Okay, so we'll put a bow on the crowning core, and we'll jump into track number 6 here. This is Queen of the Dead Dimension. Okay. this is another standout track that Geoff mentioned early on here. So I'm gonna give him the stage to go over his notes and what he thinks of Queen of Dead Dimension.
Yeah, Queen of the Dead Dimension. I can't remember if this was one of the two. I think it is one of the two tracks that first popped out on the Bandcamp that you could actually listen to. It might have been the first single, actually. And it's probably or possibly the most melodic track on the album. It's got those huge choral synths and singularly arpeggiated chords that ascend then descend and crawl sickeningly over the dense synth background. There's a lot of synths that create the bedrock of this track, and then the guitars kind of undulate over top of them. There's a huge swath of synths that erupt at the 2-minute mark, roughly at about the. Oh wait, hold on. Yeah, and those are at the 2-minute mark where they just kind of rise, and they're like, "Whoa, that's really cool." That was something that caught my ear right away. Very melodic. Roughly at the 420 mark, then you get singular. It all sort of quiets down, and you get singular bass notes that give way to a massive, almost ebow. You guys know what an ebow is? So on guitar, there's a little device that it's an electronic device, and it's got a light that is emitting, and the light source, you play it over top of a guitar string, and it kind of acts as it vibrates the string at a constant tension and pitch, right? So when you do it, you can do, I'll give you a good example of an ebow. The song The Drapery Falls for Opeth. You have that wah, 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 wah. That's ebow. It's this, it's almost like it creates an almost like violin-like sound. And that, I hear ebow on this big time. It probably isn't, but it could be. But you get those ebow-like sustained guitar melody lines that are epic and very hallucinogen-like in that section. This track's a standout, and it grows stronger. It grew stronger with every listen that I had. And it was one of the ones that I can see why they released it kind of as a single, which is kind of funny in parlance of Blut Aus Nord, like that he has singles. It's like, okay, whatever, dude. But this is the single sort of vibe to it, and killer track. Absolutely killer.
Anything you want to add into there, Peter?
Just, and I suppose I mentioned this earlier, I thought the rhythm that underpins this song was just immense. It really propelled it along. It has those melodies and that unnerving harmony and the guitars sort of layered on top of it. But even the final section as well, with the tremolo riffing comes back in again, and they have that fade chanting. For me, it was overshadowed by the drumming. I just really enjoyed that. It might be straightforward, maybe simplistic, but that's what I like in my drumming. So, yeah, another one that stood out for me with a great rhythm through it.
I guess I would just add that this track reminded me of parts in previous Blut Aus Nord releases where it feels like, to Peter's point of it feeling large, like feeling like a massive sort of push behind a particular line. Like this track offered a greater amount of like size than some of the previous ones on this record. And I once again, I would reiterate the same sort of points I made in regard to their third track, Endless Multitude. It stands out for me just because of the various sort of guitar sort of techniques operating on a single track. So we get sort of his entirety of the skill set as a guitarist, trying new things, but also pulling back to sort of familiar techniques that.
Yeah, there's a I'm going to say this word bad. Dynamism. Is it dynamism?
You got it. You got it.
Dynamism. I kept wanting to say dynamic, but I didn't. I knew that dynamicness is not a word. So dynamism, that was kind of like, there was just a lot more to to suck you in and keep you there. So,
Okay. Any closing thoughts before we move on to the next track?
nope.
Okay. This next one. Okay. The Black Vortex. Okay. When you mentioned Obscura, you know, Gore Guts, this is the one. It just really felt like he took a song that was already, or like a chord progression that was already potentially atonal or off, and like spun the record backwards.
Yeah.
I first heard it, and it was the most like jarring, right? I felt to a certain degree of comfort with this record. Like it was kind of on a solid little flow coming off of the previous track.
Yeah.
This one drops, and just like my shining moment where like they're pulling back my eyelids, and like it felt that disturbing here.
Well, it's got that and you're just like you can't lock in on any point of reference that's normal. You're kind of like you're just constantly at. Here's how I put this track. It's like you're on the deck of a ship that is being thrown side to side in a maelstrom of sorts, or a typhoon, or whatever, a hurricane, and you're just holding on for dear life, just going, all right, man, just get me through this shit. I don't know if I'm going to survive this or not. I mean, you've got the swirling, disembodied voices that are all over the place in there. You've got that they're saying nothing discernible. You got these swirling, ugly guitars lurching and sliding in and out of phase, and as I said, embodying a seasick feeling, like you're lurching to and fro on a sinking ship, as gargled, impenetrable vocals say nothing and have no melodic place in this dense mess that is this track. But yet, it's very hypnotic. It's very engrossing, yet entirely grotesque. It's a grotesque sounding track throughout, and suddenly the nightmare ends and you're left with traces of faraway piano notes at the end and melodies on the guitar, as if this isn't real. Like, did I just hear that, or did I fall asleep with this in my, because I don't know if you guys have done this. I don't generally try to fall asleep with Blut Aus Nord, but I used to go to sleep with a lot of dark ambient stuff. And Kellen, you'll appreciate this, because Heresy, is that kind of an album that, believe it or not, I used to fall asleep to that. And I would always be woken up at some point going, what the fuck was that? Because I'm not hearing it with awake ears. I'm hearing it with my brain is kind of trying to make sense of it in a deep sleep. And it's horrifying. And that's what this is like. Like, I was listening to it while I was asleep, but I wasn't. I was awake for it all. And it's absolutely horrible. It's just like super cool,
Peter, what do you think?
Okay, I suppose put an rhetorical question at the start. Have you ever heard a more disturbing beginning to Blut Aus Nord song? The horns at the start, I take it they're horns, some kind of maybe treated horns or whatever. Right. They just sound absolutely manic and demented. And you talk about your reference to Obscura. I'm going to give you a bit of a left field reference. The Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. They were around in the 60s.
Yeah, I know that
70s.
band. I never listened to it. Yeah.
So those guys were all trained in jazz, and they start to take the mick out of jazz music, and sort of like of the 1920s, and they like to mess about and like teach and everything as the song goes along, whatever. It's almost like a metal version of the Bonzos at their most disturbing. Funny you mentioned like the being on a ship, Geoff. For me, this one, I wrote these notes down before I read the story.
Right.
So I said this song feels like it's tearing you apart from the inside. Whatever you've encountered in this other dimension is doing so with menacing and deranged glee. And from reading about the story, one of the character who encounters Nahab, she has a sidekick, some kind of rat-like character in the book. And one of the other tenants who he's told about this encounter he's had the day before, the next day witnesses this rat-like creature emerging from your man's chest and kills him.
Oh,
That's
nice.
just weird. I honestly, God, these are my notes. I wrote these down before I even read about that. So that's what the song felt like to me. It was like turn you apart piece by piece, basically.
Sure, like if there was a rat that was born inside of my chest and like alien style was about to erupt, like this would be a perfect song to play.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
Right, because like that sense of like not just fear, but like a hurried kind of panic. There's an interesting, so on the record, there's a quote. Geoff, I wanted to go back to like the contrast from where this song begins to where it ends. So the quote on
contrast, yeah,
is the darkness always teemed with unexplained sound, and yet he sometimes shook with fear lest the noise he heard should subside, and allow him to hear certain other fainter noises which he suspected were lurking behind them.
Well, that's exactly it right there.
It you have this like explosive moment of horror, and then it ends and it recedes, and like the amount of discomfort that you feel knowing what potential is there and having it leave you,
right?
Like that kind of after effect is one of the things that this song also provides. But I really like that you brought up horns, Peter, because right, you're talking like about, I'm almost certain he's playing a guitar, but the way a horn like texturally will sound on a record feels to me like he's replicating that to some degree, like that kind of acid jazz, horn and rewind kind of effect. It's all over that. When you mentioned being seasick, Geoff, I was like, if I was on the brink of vomiting on a ship and someone wanted to play a song to make me throw up, this would be like the little thing you would want to pull on, because it is the last thing that brings anyone comfort. Just in the most like, I don't want to. It's not through extremity, right? Like there are more violent things that are happening in terms of like distortion, pacing, things that we're well acquainted with. But it's the deliberate kind of chord choices he's making here that offend our sensibility. And I think that speaks to how, like, I think when we did our deep dive, Peter, you talked about how well versed he is in like modern sort of orchestral classic music. Mm-hmm. And that completely, to me, like if he's composing this, seems to me what he's pulling from. Something that is so explicitly atonal, that is immense, like it is like offends how we understand how chords should be structured.
Exactly.
And the fact that he takes you there and he puts a blast beat on top of it, god damn, it is one of the most amazing tracks here, hands down. The like whatever chewing on tinfoil sort of reaction I had.
Oh God!
When I first heard it.
Ouch, that hurt just talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just that level of like initial sort of pushback or sort of reaction you have immediately to the way something sounds. So
I'm not sure if Logan was referring to this track or not, but
yeah,
the track that sounds like a buzzing hive is exactly it. It's like a maniacal horde of buzzing hives of some sort of insect creature that you just never want to run into. You just do not want to entertain ever facing whatever is making that noise. And you're right in that it's this assault on the classical thought process of melody and harmony and musicality in a weird way too. Is this musical? Yes, it is, but it's a dangerous musicality, this particular song. It's dangerous in that it literally, if you had to listen to this song over and over and over and over endlessly. I don't know if you guys remember a bunch of years ago, I think it was in Iraq, I believe. Might have been Afghanistan, I don't remember, but it came to light that they were using Skinny Puppy in Guantanamo. It was Guantanamo for prisoners. Which,
Part
you
of
know,
like the sleep deprivation torture.
Right, the sleep deprivation torture, and then lopping on, I think it was Vivisec they were using, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that was it. But could you imagine being sleep deprived for maybe a week and listening to this song over and over and over at ear-bleeding volume? You would probably start to eat rocks in your cell and pray that they killed you. I mean, it just would be a form of torture that would not be right in any way, shape, or form, right? You know?
Well, I don't know how true it is, but I heard they play in St. Anger in Guantanamo Bay, so I'd rather listen to that than St. Anger over and over again. But but what something you said, Callan, about like he's almost like playing with our sensibilities about how music should be composed, and that's kind of what the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band did, if you know them. I mean, they even wrote a song, "We Are Normal and We Want Our Freedom," as a dig at people who just like regular, or they call it regular music at the time. They wanted just to mess with people's head. So
this is in many ways this is the most horrid track on the album, but it's also maybe the most overtly interesting because it's got all the elements of Mort. It's got all the elements of Work That Transforms. It's got a bit of the elements of Mystical Beast. It's got the black metal-ness of Icy. It's kind of all those things. And it's fucking hideous. It's really hideous.
Okay, so from there we can put a lovely little bow on that one, and we'll move to track number 8 here, and this is entitled "Nameless Rights." All right, so in my, I think you mentioned this briefly, Geoff, that there are a few tracks here that seem to be composed structurally of the exact same kind of stuff you heard on Abysses. And to me, this is one of the songs that feels like it could be on Undreamable. Just the pacing of it, while the production here, I think, still is, in my opinion, superior. Just the kind of flow to this song that follows sounds like it could be potentially part of the previous release. And it's not like a criticism necessarily, but it just one of the few songs on this record that seems to share a lot of the same characteristics. I'll let Peter tackle this to begin with and get your thoughts on this one.
Just on this one, what I felt was the melody that comes in at the midpoint. It's actually quite, I put down here, beautiful, but it reminded me more. That section reminded me more of mainstream black metal, and it was almost uplifting. And I suppose think back to the end of the 7/7 7 trilogy, that final album we talked about, Cosmosophy, and that felt. I had that same feeling I had when I listened to that album, in that one section in this one. So I just thought, I put down a question. I put down these random questions to myself. Like, is this a release, or is there such a thing as relief through suffering, a release after the end of suffering? And that's what that part of this song gave me. That feeling it gave me during it. Anyway, I don't know. I'm probably rambling here, but that's what I took away from this one, because again, it starts off very similar to the sort of overall atmosphere of the album, the pounding rhythms, but then I don't know, this particular midpoint just spoke to me in a weird way. I don't know.
Okay. Geoff, what are your thoughts here?
We're on Nameless Rights, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I apologize, man. I was not being a starfucker there and mentioning that for any other reason. I got to work this out with him. So
I've been up to date with the back and forth here, so I'm happy for you. All
Sorry.
good. Go for it. So we're on Nameless Rights.
Lurching. I love that word when I talk about this band. Lurching, shape-shifting, maniacal blackness. Has a lot of synth-driven melodies. This is a more synth-driven song than the guitar-driven stuff that we've been predominantly talking about. And those melodies are over top a propulsive guitar and drum bedrock. This track highly features the synths, or maybe it's Ebo again. I'm not entirely sure. It's hard for me to fully get what's going on there, but yeah, this is a good track. I have to say this might be my least favorite track on the album. Not for any specific reason other than that it doesn't bring much new to the table, whereas the other stuff prior to it have. And so I like it. I just feel it's maybe the one track for me that kind of notches a little lower than all the other ones.
Earlier in the comments, Jordan made a good point regarding the interludes here, because we're getting ready to step into Hideous Dream Opus number 3. Do you think, like, this was like, in terms of the placement, if you had put the following interlude number 3 after Black Vortex, do you think that would have been a better placement for it?
Absolutely. Should have been.
Okay.
Yep.
To go after something that intense and then kind of creep your way into Nameless Rights, and that would give you essentially 3 tracks that would divide. You'd have Mental Paralysis, Endless Multitude. I mean, you'd have those 2, then Opus number 2, 3 tracks, Opus number 3, and then 3 tracks to close the album. I thought that was an interesting point, that there seems to be like a large section in the middle of the record that we don't get to know. And
no, I think that definitely would have been the place for the interlude of number 3, and it would have just given you that moment of respite that you might maybe needed, because to me this song is kind of Black Vortex Part 2, only not as good, not as dynamic. If I'm wrong, I could be wrong. How long is this track? Do you remember? 3 minutes again?
The Nameless Rights is just under 5 minutes.
Oh, it's that long. Yeah, and see, the Black Vortex was, how long was that one? A little
just
over
a little
4?
bit. I mean, around the same, like 450.
Yeah. There's the one place, and I'm shocked about it actually, because you would think so far the sequencing's been pretty much perfect, but that would have been the place for it, and I think that maybe was a misstep there. But who am I to tell the guy what to do with his music? I mean, he's probably, if he sees this somewhere along the line, he'll send the Wrath of Cthulhu or whatever upon me, and I'll wake up with my head chopped off hanging on the back of my door or something.
Okay, well, let's just get into it. And so this will lead us into Hideous Dream, Opus number 3. It's almost like entirely vocal. It sounds like, right? Like there's probably some keys in there, but we get that same sort of withdrawn vocal haunting sort of.
It's
presence
processed
going on.
operatic vocal nightmares is what it is. And, you know, what I said was distant shards of your sanity drifting away. There you go.
Okay.
Like I said, I channeled Shakespeare for this
There we
tonight.
go.
So.
Okay. Well, unless we have anything to add to our interlude here, we can jump into the last 2 tracks on this record. So this is The Ultimate Void of Chaos, which is track number 10 on the record. Okay, so we're not closing this thing out with a little bit of a fight going on.
Yeah.
Geoff, do you want to jump in and give us your thoughts on The
Well, I
Ultimate
mean,
Void?
a little bit of shades of Black Vortex going on here. You got all the swirling. But my write-up on this one is traumatic assault and battery of what's left of your sanity from this hideous ugliness. Snarling, monstrous voices, which you didn't hear there, but they come in, trust me. And crescendos of choral vocals. Check this out. This is brilliant right here. Attacking the last nerves in your frayed ends of sanity. Oh, come on now. That's brilliant. Of course. Broken synapses, poisonous biochemical attack, battering all senses, no light enters, brain death is imminent. There you go. That's what that song sounds like to me.
All right. Are your how's your sanity doing here, Peter? Are they been frayed?
This is. I wrote here that the swirling guitars, the martial pounding rhythms, which almost got flesh-like at times,
Yep.
makes you feel like this whole world is in full swing of collapsing in on itself. We're entering into the final stages of this nightmare.
See, that's the tricky thing. You brought up Godflesh a couple times. And didn't you just say Godflesh?
Yeah, so it was Godfest-like at times.
Oh, I thought you said Godflesh. I'm sorry. But you
Yeah,
brought that up earlier.
Godfest-like at times. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And that's
It's like
where
the
I
martial
wonder about
pounding
these,
rhythm.
yeah, I wonder about these drums because we know Godflesh doesn't have a drummer, right? And nowadays drum programs are so ridiculously complex that you wouldn't maybe know. But again, I don't know. It's just a mind fuck.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, we could. I don't mean to bring this back up again. For me, I do. It did sound like there's. I don't know if it has to do with like the separation in the instruments, or for some reason, paying attention to the way the snare sounded. Those are kind of things that like immediately I will sort of jump to on a drum sound for a record, and this to me the initial impression, and even in subsequent listens, like I more likely those moments where I'm confusing or questioning as to whether this is a programmed drum or not has to do with its relationship to the way that the guitar is represented.
Okay.
It doesn't. For me, it's not like they've mastered at least how a drum should sound. Like right when you get like live drums in the studio, that part. So I don't know if they like played the drums individually and then put them back onto a machine kind of deal. Like you tracked them and then he's playing them to a drum machine, whatever. But there's like enough rhythm and flow and It's confused me at least to the point where I no longer have like a very specific, absolute. This is a program drum kind of sound.
So let me just get this straight. You do or don't think it's real drums, or are you not sure?
I don't. If you were asking me, when I listen to this record, do I immediately think this is a program drum? No. And if they are, they have fooled me in the listening of the experience.
Okay, so you think it is live acoustic drums?
Yeah, I think the way these drums sound, they were recorded
Okay.
at least live, and if they were then afterwards, that live tracking was then whatever digitally composed to a specific beat, like that. It could be that way, but the way they sound, right? Like when you listen to Dialogue with the Stars, to me, that program, those drums sound programmed. Like the shape, the timbre of the drum sounds mechanical, where I don't get that on this record. But yeah, I
Well,
guess
keep in mind though, that's almost 20 years ago, right?
right. I mean,
Drum software has come light years since then, but I just, yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, I think it is, and then I don't think it is. All throughout the album, I kept going, well, yeah, but maybe, but no, but maybe, but I just, and I don't focus on drums like a lot of people do. I tend to, focus on guitars and vocals predominantly and melodies. But I found myself at various points in time in this album, these two albums, or well, this album in particular, going, man, I just can't freaking tell. It was weird.
okay, well, we're going to move here to our closing track on this record. This is Forgotten Aeon, track number 11. Okay.
See, now, right there, listening to that little sample, I'm thinking it's real drums, but it's a triggered bass drum. It's triggered. It's that clickety clackety. That's what I'm thinking on that, just that moment right there.
Okay. Well, in terms of how this album ends, I chose that particular song, or that moment, that song. There is a scream that's coming in towards the end of that track. And when I did a little bit of like researching for this in terms of trying to hear the witch on it, we get a lot of these sung vocals that you could, I'd imagine, sort of this witch character sort of breathing or lightly singing or haunting in. That track, we almost get like her scream entering the fray. It's a pretty haunting moment on the record where you can almost identify like a very unique characteristic that isn't Vindsval like gurgling or barking.
I call them gargoyle vocals.
Sure. Like out of all the different personalities that he plays, that particular song in that moment, it feels to me like a new vocal presence has sort of entered the track and serves to sort of haunt you as you leave this record. That was my impression with this one. I'll let you jump in here, Peter, and give us your thoughts.
Yeah, so it felt like a continuation on from the previous song. It was really hammering home the point that you were now immersed in this nightmare. With the guttural vocals were re-emerging, reminding you that the protagonist hasn't finished with you yet. And I did note down that then these faint screams can be heard. And is there someone else maybe experienced this hell with me? Are these the victims that maybe came before me? So I didn't see it as the witch. I thought it was maybe a warning from someone else who's maybe experienced this nightmare, and they're trying to warn me. The abrupt cessation of the hell takes you by surprise and really unnerves you with that. I don't know if it's a drum, just a single drum being played at the end, or the tapping. But I was not expecting the album to close just like that there. So it's what's in store next, really.
Okay, Geoff.
Yeah, I mean, you got more frantic bending of the guitars and the synths. You've got it's very hypnotic with tons of gargoyle-like vocals from, I assume, Vinz or whatever's going on there. And they're kind of underneath the mix. They come up, they rise, they kind of ebb, they flow. And then you get a mix of what you guys are referencing, I call banshee wails. There's just these banshee screams, like, whatever a banshee sounds like. I've never actually heard a banshee, but I'm assuming they wail and scream. That's what they say they do. So there you go.
I've seen one. I've heard them.
You've seen one.
Yeah. If you hear the banshee, then
cry of the banshee, right? But yeah, the percussion and the pummeling percussion and drums, the synths droning and lurching, as they do with BAM, and this is where a moment of kind of, well, we'll tie it up at the end. Are we going to tie it off at the end then? Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a good track. I think I would have liked a little bit more of a dynamic track on there. There's cool stuff there, but it's a little less. I would have liked to have, honestly, I would have ended it if I had done it. I would have ended it on either Nameless Rights or Black Vortex or Queen of the Damned, kind of to give it this tie-in. I felt like this was not one of the strongest tracks in the whole run, and I would have maybe done things a little different. Here I am second guessing the guy that's been doing this for 35 years or whatever, right? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything, if we're going to sort of put a bow on it, that I would say, like, as a collective criticism, is potentially track listing order, but comparing the two Disharmonium records this past, I guess, week or so, and getting ready for this in a very concentrated and deliberate way, I prefer Nahab out of the two of them.
Same here.
And I like last time, I had put sort of Disharmonium, Undreamable Abysses to the side after spending all that time listening to this.
Yeah.
Right. Like I needed a break.
Had to.
So it was very much like a refresher course in that record. But I do think if anyone's watching and you're curious or you have previous experience specifically with the more modern sort of iteration of Blut Aus Nord, then I would by all means pick this record up. It's in recent. I'm trying to think of the last time I liked a Blut Aus Nord record this much. Probably if I can go back. I mean, I really liked Deo Salutis Me, even though for a lot of people that was a difficult listen.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's coming up on 6 years ago. So
when that came out?
Yeah, 2017.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess it was. Yeah.
So in the out of the albums that Vindsval has been putting out as of late, I go back, even though that's kind of like a deeper cut.
Yeah, that's a weird one to go. Yeah, I kind of dig that one. I mean, it's like, it's kind of like saying, man, Mort's my favorite Blut Aus Nord. I mean,
it's not my favorite, but I mean, the other ones that compete for the top spot are Dialogue and Work Which Transforms God. Those are the two that usually trade my favorite within the
right.
lineup. But like when I remember we did this last time, and Peter pulled out Mort for the first time in a while and listened to, he's like, I kind of this made more of an impact on me than I had previously thought of it.
Yeah, so. It ended up in my top 3, if I recall correctly. Yeah. So, which I would never have thought going into the deep dive. So,
right. So
yeah, it's.
Go ahead, Geoff.
It's, I had a couple quick thoughts on this, real fast to wrap up. Like you, this album speaks to me much more than DUA. I like DUA, but it's kind of a bit impenetrable because it's just, for lack of a better word of putting it, it's kind of monotone, whereas this is stereo. Nahab is. There's far more variety on offer here. The guitars are less a part of the fabric of the buzzing horror on DUA. They're more pronounced and attacking and discernible. So this is far more appealing to me overall. That said, they're both very good albums. My only sort of caveat, and man, the BAN fanboys are gonna have my balls right here. I can tell you. Where does he go from here in terms of? Hang on, let me rephrase that. This territory feels relatively well mined. I truly well mined, meaning mining like for gold or something like that. And you know, and I feel a little bit like somewhat like, you know, have you exhausted this creative vein of this style that you're doing? And by that style I mean the twisted, malformed, non-musical, non-melodic thing, right? Where it's like, should that be in every single song that he does? Now he didn't do it on Hallucinogen or Saturnian, but now we've had two albums plus the Faustian, or not Faustian Echoes, that's Agalog, Lovecraftian Echoes, where it's very pronounced again. And so I know since he likes to work in threes, we know a third album in the trilogy is likely coming, but where does he go? How does he differentiate that? Now, he was able to differentiate this one fairly discernibly from the first one. However, man, I don't know if I want to say this, but I kind of feel like I got to say it. I do feel like I've heard it before. And that kind of worries me a little bit. Not worries me, that's the wrong word. Concerns me maybe a little bit that, you know, is he putting too much material out too quickly? Is he kind of running out of ideas overall? I don't know. I mean, that's questions I wanted to pose to you guys.
Peter, do you want to answer that one?
Possibly. I mean, I think I'm maybe a slightly different page for you guys on this one, because it took me a while to really hear a lot of the dynamics in this album. And first listen, like I originally thought the last two songs were just, like I said, the final one's a continuation of the penultimate one, but it almost sounded just too samey to me. And I didn't think it was, I don't know, I like the suspense and the tension of Undreamable Abysses a lot more. As I've listened to this more this week in the lead up to this stream, I've come to understand it and sort of see what he was doing with the songs and see a bit more variation that it didn't originally hear in the songs. As for has he near enough mined a well to completion? I don't know, possibly. We said before that we know what to expect from him. He'll either give us something melodic or he'll give us something dissonant, and different variations of those two themes. I don't know. I honestly don't know if he's going to do anything different outside of that realm.
I don't know that. I don't know that he necessarily. You know, as a guitar player, do you guys play at all? Okay. So one of the things I find often with myself is that I get kind of in ruts where I play the same things over. I'll start a riff and I'll be like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. And I'll be like, wait a minute. I kind of already wrote this riff before. It's kind of like that riff. I'll record them on my phone, right? Ideas. I'll be like, yeah, okay. Or when I'm doing a finger pick passage, I'll be like, oh, that's really cool. And they'll be like, wait a minute, that's like the one you wrote like 4 weeks ago. And it's hard not to do that. It really is hard to kind of break outside the box and always discover new territory. And I will say that this guy's put out a lot of incredible albums and written a lot of music over. When did he start again, Peter? Please help me out.
The first record's in
Maybe it was
95.
95.
95. I was going to say 97. So 95, 2005, 15. We're talking almost 30 years. I guess what I'm getting at is he running dry a little bit? And I don't necessarily think that's the case, but I do kind of worry about it a little bit that, you know, we're getting into the same sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Well, I guess what I would say is this specific guitar technique is what you seem to be referring. I initially thought you were posing the question regarding Lovecraft. Like, do we need
no. I'm talking about
right.
No, I'm talking about the whole BAN sound and vibe, I guess.
So I just want to go back. It always seemed to me, though, what made this particular, I guess now, series interesting is that guitar technique I always associated with as a bit more industrial albums.
True. Yeah.
And because now what's interesting, like in now thinking about it, is he's sort of splintered off. Like you had your traditional sort of pagan cosmos black metal in the Memoria Vetusta. Now that's gone. I don't think he's going to go back to that, right? He could oscillate. He could jump to those records, and it would be a break for him. And then I don't think he's doing the industrial thing really now anymore, right? Like that doesn't seem to be as much present and part of his sound. If those come back, they'd be a welcome addition. What made Hallucinogen interesting is it seemed like he was venturing into the bit more conventional atmospheric black metal.
Yeah.
But I think to hear this initially when I first heard Undreamable Abysses, I liked that we were getting that kind of guitar technique in a new context. But I would say if we get a third record in this style or in something that's approximately, close to this style, I would not be surprised if we get a deciding sort of break. If there's something that comes in that sort of severs the tie and needs to, clear the table before getting back into what his next sort of evolution is.
It'd be really cool is if he did like a dark ambient album as the final thing, which is nothing but troll, gargoyle, weird fucking shit, but no guitar, no bendies, just dark ambient synth or something like that. That'd be really weird. So, hey, I wanted to show this quick before I got a jet, guys. So this is the limited edition of the album. I'm not going to get into the story about how this kind of cost me way more than it should have because of. I'm not going to get into it. But long story short, I ended up buying it from France when I didn't realize it was on the American website for about $15 cheaper. And when I asked to switch it over, I was told, well, you were told about that up front. It was just a bummer deal. But anyways, the deal with this is 545 copies, I think. And it's a slipcase, which is kind of cool, right? And then I've got the standard same thing as you, Kellen. But what really was unique about this was it came with a couple of things. One that wasn't even supposed to be, it was not going to happen, I guess. It was kind of a throw-in at the last minute. So it came with this. This was not actually talked about, I believe. And it's the silkscreened like album artwork, and then on the bottom it's actually serial number, which is really cool. Looks like it's hand filled out too. So 515 copies total, and then you get this as well. all this for only $65. Yes, that's what I paid for this album. But you get which is a pretty badass poster. But I never hang these things up like an idiot. So, it just lays in the jacket and, hey, look what I got. It's real cool, guys. But you know what I mean? It's just like I never am like, well, I'm going to go spend all this money on a frame. And then, of course, this is the variant is the kind of a Coke bottle clear, or not Coke bottle, root beer bottle, root beer sort of splatter. And so there you go. What's your variant? Do you know?
It's a little bit more of a merge.
Yeah. Did you have like the Galaxy print?
Yeah, it's like pull it out here. Little show and tell to end this.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost went for that one, but then I got sucked into the. Well, you didn't buy Disharmonium, or you didn't buy DUA, so you got to buy this one. And then I'm a dummy. What can I say?
I just had my bog standard.
You just went for the CD. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But it's interesting you mentioned there about when he came out with some dark ambient album. He recently posted on his Facebook. Was it a Tricky album?
Huh.
So he's in this trip hop.
He's listening to Drip Hop?
Well, he posted up Tricky. He used to be in Bass with
Tricky, yeah.
Yeah.
See, man, now
So,
I would love to interview him, but man, I asked him back when we did our deep dive. I said, hey, I linked it and he liked it on Instagram.
Huh.
And I was like, oh, cool. So I sent him a text message. In fact, I texted or DM. I texted him from the hospital when I was laying in the ER. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing this, man. I'm going for
dedication.
it. Never heard a word back. Never heard a word.
I mean,
I looked to see if there had been any interviews for this album from him, but I can't find a thing.
I think that I'll just end on this note. He hasn't really gone back to a desanctification record.
No.
So if he were to sort of explore that side of the catalog,
that wouldn't shock me at all. You're right. That would be maybe or who knows? Maybe he does a dark ambient trip hop rap album. Like who, are you on board if it's a rap album? You would be, Kellen, but I probably wouldn't be.
I want more of those horns, those demented horns. So give us that.
Yeah.
Jordan's here in the comment. He mentions Imperial Triumphant. I know he's a fan of that band, and they've got a lot of free jazz in their sound. So I wouldn't.
See, I don't really hear that here, Jordan. I'm sorry, I just don't hear it. And I got to go to another stream in 5 minutes, so I don't have time to get into that. But speaking of Imperial Triumphant, did you guys see they covered Jacob's Ladder by Rush?
No. I'm not surprised, but I can.
Holy fuck! It is a true. What the hell is going on moment. It was. I'm not saying I didn't like it. I've struggled with Imperial Triumph. I just don't know. I struggle with it, and I have an album by him, but I just struggle with it. But man, I'm like, wait, what? And I pulled that song up and listened to it yesterday. I'm like, all right, my relationship with that band, man. You don't fuck with that band, right? But it's truly out there in every possible way you can think of it. And I didn't hate it. I don't know that I liked it either, but I didn't hate it. So it was like, what's going on here? This is truly bizarre. But Kellen, thank you so much for doing this, man. I apologize, guys, for
thank you
constantly running on, but I get excited about this shit and then things go crazy. And
all right, well, as we're closing up here.
Well, just as an aside, I got to go do a dad number 6 with Lee from Heavy Art Talk. So jump on over there, guys, if you want to go catch that. It's Pink Floyd. You can't go wrong with Pink Floyd. Animals versus Dark Side. And earlier today, I interviewed Richard Barbieri from Porcupine Tree. We had some major issues in the first 20 minutes with audio, but we got it squared away and had a 2-hour interview. And hey, Paul Masvidal, Kelly Schaefer, I think it's going to happen. Maybe Wednesday night. Stay tuned. Kelly, I love you, buddy. You're the best. Peter, you're awesome, dude.
Thank you,
I apologize, guys. Don't hate me.
Thank you both so much for jumping on this. And letting me put you to the torch of another band record. But once again, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone in the chat, everyone who stopped by, hope to catch you in the comments.
Peter, remember when we were talking yesterday? I said, hour and a half. Yeah, no problem. We can knock it out in an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's 5 to 2 in the morning. I have to get up for work in a few hours. So.
Okay. That would have been, if I wasn't on the stream, it would have been an hour and a half.
But I'm working from home, so in the morning I will watch your dad series on
Well, we're going to do
tomorrow.
one. Both you guys are in. Kellen, you and I are doing Wasp. You're doing the debut, and I'm doing the Headless Children. And Peter, you still haven't chosen, but I'm doing Leaving Las Vegas. Cocteau Twins, no medal on that one.
No. I think I probably will stick with Head Over Heels.
I love you guys. You guys are awesome, man. You know I do.
Thank you so much. Have a good night, you guys.
Thanks,
Peace
guys.
out, man.
Take care. Bye now.